Welcome to Google Ads Unleashed, the podcast that helps you harness the power of Google Ads. And now your host, Jeremy Young.
A client's asked me recently, how do I actually trust my own data? When do I actually scale? What do I do to interpret the results that I'm getting? And since this is such an interesting question, I thought I'll do some ramblings about this on this episode. Welcome back to Google Ads Unleashed, guys. Hope everyone is doing fabulously this Monday. So last week I had a client, actually several clients, come up with as simple as a complex question to me, and they said, how do I actually know when to push and to interpret the data that I'm seeing? Okay, because they intuitively know one thing, that on-platform data doesn't actually always equate what is happening on the bottom line. Okay, and I wouldn't say I have mastered this. No one has mastered this, right? Because the real world is too complex to understand how everything kind of works together, which is why humans always try to abstract things, right? We always use models to try and explain real life behavior, right? The idea of a theory or model is to explain very complex sort of processes to the best degree possible, okay? So you can think about this of everything, right? Like the theory of relativity is a set of couple of equations that explains a very, very complex physical phenomenon, right? Or, I don't know, a map on your phone isn't actually the real world, of course. It's just a very simplified abstraction of what is happening in the real world. And we do exactly the same in marketing, right? We use different attribution models to explain what is likely happening in the real world. We use metrics that sort of try and measure some real life impact that is actually happening, but isn't really the reality, right? I don't know, for instance, view time or something like that, right? It's just it's an abstraction of a real life thing that happened. And in order to find out what to push in your ads, for instance, which channels to push or which campaigns to push, you have to, over time, find out what is the best route to choose a level of abstraction for how to explain what is happening in real life with your business, okay? And the way I go about this, I just want to offer one kind of viewpoint on this today. And this podcast is meant to be just more of a sort of philosophical thought of how to arrive at this conclusion, okay? And in my opinion, in order to understand what is probably reality, you have to do three things. So maybe four things. The fourth one I'm going to say straight away, because the issue that I've had, or that we have in digital marketing, is that what we attribute to various marketing campaigns or touch points is not what equates to reality. So I've done a full podcast, a couple of podcasts about this. This is the concept of incrementality, right? So for instance, a ROAS of 5 on platform could mean that you in reality have a ROAS of 8 or no ROAS whatsoever, right? What I mean by that, for instance, a branded campaign will always show great ROAS, but the reality is it doesn't really give you £1 or £10 for each pound you spend. That pound was earned in a meta ad or a YouTube ad that has generated the brand search, right? So you have very, very low incrementality, but very, very high attribution. Whereas on the other hand, you sometimes have extreme poor attribution, such as YouTube ads. And as a result, or sometimes shopping ads can look quite poorly. But in reality, you have very, very high incrementality. Many people are buying. We see this even sometimes with the store that we support. It generates 35 to 40 sales a day when Google Ads is on, and it's absolutely flying. And on days like yesterday was a bank holiday, which is typically very quiet, but you'd expect even a few sales come through organically. No. When Google Ads is off, even on a weekday when it's randomly off, when the payment method's like gone down, this has happened a few times, then just no sales come in, but it's not as many as it shows on the dashboard, which makes you wonder, is Google more incremental than it actually shows on the platform? So understanding incrementality is extremely important. Understanding the concept really already helps with your budget decisions, but it ultimately really helps you to choose the right attribution targets in order to achieve real life outcomes. But this is a completely different sort of debate. I don't want to open that up today. I have a simple 3-step framework, which is the first 3 steps through which I understand how to make budget decisions, how to make ROAS decisions, how to make decisions to push. And that is, number 1, understanding your post-purchase survey. Arguably, I find it is one of course, even that can be skewed because people can give wrong answers or they don't understand the post-purchase survey sometimes, but inaccuracies, however it is, I mean, you can always debate about that. The reality is people who tell you where you know you're from or where they know your brand from is a massive indicator of if anything's working, right? Let's say you run no radio ads and you have radio as an option in the post-purchase survey. Absolutely no one is going to likely click radio ads, right? But what will happen is once you start radio ads, more people will start clicking it. It gives you an indication of how well your ads are working. Let's say you made 50,000 in a week, and suddenly in that week you've started on radio ads, and then 10% of people then say, "Oh, I've heard of this brand on the radio," and you spent £1,000 on all of the spots on the radio spots. Well, you have an ROI of about 5, right? So it gives you a good indicator of where to push. The same applies to YouTube ads. If you have YouTube as an option in the post-purchase survey, and then suddenly you get an incremental uplift once you actually run ads. Let's say only 5% or something tick YouTube because, well, they probably have seen a YouTube video about this product or about the idea of this product and then searched for it and then bought yours. So that's what I mean with inaccuracies in post-purchase survey data, right? So some people may see a product on TikTok, Google and then purchase because they found it on Google, but then they will actually still take TikTok in the thing because they saw an organic video, right? It doesn't mean that Google wasn't important in the customer journey, but it's just a very, very good indicator still where people come from, right? And if people organically say YouTube, let's say 5% in this example, and then suddenly you run YouTube ads and it goes up to 10%, you know it is working, okay? The same if you remove a channel and it goes down, then you know that channel has been working, right? So that's usually an indicator that gives me a right idea of sort of overall channel return on ad spend and how much budget I should spend between different channels, okay? We have one client where basically Google ads and Meta ads is always 50-50, 50-50, 50-50 every single month. So the budget decision is super easy between me and the Meta ads guy, right? Every month we know how much you're going to spend this month, how much is, okay, great, done, right? Sometimes it's more complex, sometimes it's less complex. That's just the reality of the situation. But so yeah, post-purchase survey gives you a really good indicator if something is generally working and how much budget you should be spending roughly on a ballpark figure and what kind of return on ad spend you're actually getting right now, okay? Then the second consideration that I usually have is I then look at some form of business intelligence and tracking, okay? So overall business intelligence, something I always look at is MER and CM3, right? Or EBITDA. Mega important to just understand the overall health of the business and if our marketing spend overall is efficient. But when I then dive down, usually this exists with high ROAS, triple whale, North Beam, whatever, is some form of first party tracking, right? So because the issue that you have with Google ads and with Meta ads is that they work on 2 independent pixels that basically don't talk to each other, as you probably know. And when you have something like triple whale or whatever, it actually has just 1 pixel. So if someone comes via meta ad and then searches for the product on Google and then buys on Google, it actually understands to not, so Google will then track a sale and meta ads will track a sale, but AAA would of course only track one sale because it only was one sale that happened and will attribute it to the original source more properly. But then the challenge that you have here is that you usually have multiple attribution systems. And of course, I could probably do like another podcast on this. But broken down, I want to get back to the abstraction thought, right? An attribution model, whether it's first click, last click, position based, whatever the fuck it is an abstraction that tries to explain the reality as best as possible. And the reality is that for any kind of business, right, there are typical paths of how people find out about the business, right? So there are some businesses that have a lot of search volume. So typically, people have very often find the business via Google and then convert. Then there are other businesses where there's no search volume for the product, so they can only convert via push channels realistically, right? And then a plumber will need completely different marketing than a skincare brand and so on. So there's typical funnels and behaviors associated with each industry, and your job is to find out over time what is kind of the common pictures that I'm seeing of understanding how to attribute, like what kind of attribution model I should use in order to find out what is supporting my theory of how people navigate my e-commerce shop and the marketing channels that I use in order to end up with a purchase. What do I mean by that? Let's say I've had this example the other day. I had a client, they got meta ads running, it's working, they got Google ads running, it's working. And we've verified this through post-purchase survey as well. And they asked me what is the best attribution model on Triple Whale to understand how to optimize each. And I saw zero overlap, right? Didn't matter which attribution model I used. There was no overlap between the channels. And I said to them, listen, the reality is you should then use the attribution model on Triple Whale, which most closely matches how the attribution models on the platforms work, which would be triple attribution, right? Because it doesn't matter, there's no interaction, right? So the system that is closest to that on the platform actually explains very well what the behavior is on the platform, okay? And of the marketing channel. Then I had another client that more or less Google is sort of 80% caused by meta ads. Well, triple attribution is then terrible, of course, because you would give Google much too much credit as it doesn't operate in its silo. Rather, you would want to probably analyze Google on either total impact attribution, which is takes into account, for instance, post-purchase survey data, or something like first click, right, where the idea of the channel is to give credit when it generates the first interaction, right? So which is why first click data would then of course attribute much more weight towards meta ads, which is the introductory channel, rather than Google. Or for instance, even within Google ads, that certain channels work differently, right? For instance, triple attribution or last click would be a terrible model to judge demand gen, but first click is a much better model to judge demand gen because that is typically the consumer journey someone has. It's a push channel, it's the first touch point that someone has, and further down the line they purchase, right? So the challenge in step 2 is to understand which attribution model supports my theory of how people very likely buy with me, and then I can base the data on that. So let's say you use triple attribution in here, in this one client example with the 2 different silos. I saw in the post-purchase survey data both channels work. I saw on the first party data that there's very little overlap, so they work in a silo. So triple attribution is great, and based on that, I can actually optimize the ads. And then the third thing that I'd look at is then, of course, on-platform metrics and attribution. Okay, does that support what I'm seeing? And very often, if you get the first 2 things right, the last thing will be kind of right as well, with a few nuances. If there's massive mismatch, typically you have probably some form of attribution or tracking issue, right? There's then an issue that you're over or under reporting conversions, probably something then to look at. But let's say, for instance, in this one client that I've just mentioned, we saw post-purchase survey data. Google is driving 60 to 80% of the 60 to 70% of the revenue of new customer revenue, and Meta ads only sort of to 30% or so. So we based the budgets based on that. Then in triple attribution and other attribution methods, we verified they were completely independent of each other. So there's very, very little overlap in the customer journey. And then we looked at on-platform metrics, and he uses profit metrics. So ROAS is, of course, the North Star metric to a certain degree. We haven't done an incrementality test yet, but we're quite conservative on ROAS targets. And now we can actually say confidently, when we increase budget and put more towards like this shopping campaign, which does better than PMax or whatever it is, we're going to actually increase revenue, right? And that is how you can actually judge what you're doing and make informed decisions. Or for instance, demand gen, right? Another client of mine who asked me, how do I scale demand gen? Well, first of all, we looked at the post-purchase survey data. We've seen incremental uplift. Then by first click, we can see a couple of creatives are working better than others. So we can push those into a scaling campaign, because when we looked on the platform, the sort of core metrics that we'd look at, so for instance, click-through rate and view rate, support that people actually generate a lot of clicks and come off that channel, but are not viewing too much of the video and wasting ad spend. Okay, so we basically aligned them three things to then make an informed decision of what we do, because that is what is reflecting reality that as best as possible in an abstract model. And it takes practice to do so, right? You have to try and engage as much as you can with that sort of way of thinking in order to make the right decisions. And that is just a really important takeaway from all of this, okay? So if this was helpful, then please like and subscribe. If you still need help with it, just get in touch. Jeremy Young Google Ads on LinkedIn. You'll also find me on the website younganddigital.marketing. You can book a one-to-one call there with me. You can also send me an email at jeremy@younganddigital.marketing, and I'm more than happy to help you there as well. This has been Google Ads Unleashed with your personal Google Ads expert, Jeremy Young, and I wish you a happy and productive week ahead.
Thank you for listening to Google Ads Unleashed. To connect with Jeremy, check him out online at www.younganddigital.marketing. We'll see you next time.